In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Ghost, amen. Come, Holy Ghost, fill the hearts of thy faithful, and enkindle them the fire of the divine love. Send forth thy Spirit, and the heart shall be created. Let us pray, O God, who didst instruct the hearts of thy faithful, by the light of the Holy Ghost, grant the gifts of the same Spirit, we may be always truly wise and ever rejoice in his consolation through Christ our Lord. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. St. Pius X, Our Lady, Seat of Wisdom. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and of the Holy Ghost, amen. So welcome back, the new faces and old. We often talk about the new people, but it's good to have the old timers keep coming as well. Don't give up on that. There is a handout floating around, which I have not had time to proof, meaning I put together my whole conference, and then just moments ago I stripped from it the extras and tried to give you an outline, but there may be typos, there may be heresies, I don't know. If you find anything, let me know, because it's just a first draft of it. We can always correct anything we need to. There's a lot of new books and things up at the MI corner. I'm not, but a few things that you might be interested in. This one is the meditation booklet, which many of you already bought for Lent, but now this one is Eastertide, day by day. So that's there, a good number of them. If you're interested, it's very easy approach to meditation. As we go through marriage, we're trying to stock the table with good books on marriage. This also means that I get to do a commercial every time for Angela's Press. The nature, dignity, and mission of woman. If you want to understand marriage, well, half of marriage is understanding woman. Maybe even more than half of understanding marriage is understanding woman. All right, so this can be a help. The nature, dignity, and mission of woman. Let's face it, matrimony itself is named after the woman. Matris munus, the office of motherhood. Right, so to understand more about woman helps to understand more about marriage. All right, so the nature, dignity, and mission of woman. Casti Connubii is the encyclical that I've been quoting so much from in the classes. There are a few copies of that. We've bought Angela's Press out of their stock, and we're going to, hopefully they'll print more. We've done that with many of their books, actually. The Way of the Cross. Father McNamara, maybe 3 weeks ago, he spoke about Catholic practices in the home, especially during Lent. One of those would be doing the Way of the Cross in the home. Of course, you can come here, but you can also do it at home, and you want to create a culture of Catholicism within your own family. Things like this, praying the Way of the Cross together, singing the Stabat Mater, perhaps in English if you can't do the Latin. All right, the very efforts at singing as a family, all right, whether they're worth recording or whether they're just laughable, they're going to make an impression on the children. All right, laughable, they're making light, but you do your very best. The children are going to be impressed by that. You want them to go away from when they leave your home one day. You want them to take lots of Catholic memories with them. So there's no strict way of doing that. You create a culture that echoes what happens in the church. So we bought lots of copies of those. We've got some of the bigger books, which have several different ways of the cross in it. They're great for, let's say, adults. They're great for kids too, but unless you want to buy 7 of them at $30 each, for a big family, I don't know. So we got some of those, but also a lot of these little ones, which are cheaper and which are just the Liguori, St. Alphonsus Liguori method, and with pictures, and it's good for the kids. So lots of copies of those there. Successful Fathers, we have that book on woman, on motherhood, well, also one on fathers. You notice the difference. Women will read a book that size. That's perfect for a man. All right? And it's good. The 4 temperaments, if you understand each other a little better, it's easier to live together. All right.
Can I just say something since we did the Way of the Cross by St. Alphonsus the Liguori today?
Mm-hmm.
At the back of the Passion of our Lord Jesus Christ, he's actually got the clock of the Passion, which is very handy during Lent.
All
I
right.
just
And the
thought
ones
this
in our
would-
in our books there. It may not be in this one, but
Possibly not,
yeah.
but it's...
In any
it
case,
is-
yeah, take a look. Now, there's lots of devotions out there that could be helpful. Sure. All right. So today, I want to start by recapitulating or tying up some loose ends from last week, and then launch into some new material. But even this tying up is going to be fairly new. All right. So the first question, it's based on a question that came after the class last week. One of you came up and asked, well, Father, the first end, the primary end of marriage is children. So what if a couple knows that they cannot have children? What if a couple, before they get married, knows that they cannot have children? Can they enter a valid marriage? Right? It's a good question. Right? The long and short of it is, we have to distinguish between sterility and impotency. Sterility and impotency. Sterility means the mere inability to procreate. Meaning, for example, the woman is infertile. Right? The doctors may know from some medical test that you're not able to have children. That doesn't make it impossible. There may be an extra weight or burden on marriage, but it doesn't make it impossible to contract a valid marriage. Because, let's face it, some people get married and only find out later that they can't have children. Their marriage is valid. It's for life. There are still two other ends of marriage. Well, let's say there are the secondary ends of marriage. The remedy for concupiscence and the mutual love. And those are still perfectly valid. And the couple's not doing anything to stop, to prevent having children. They're doing everything the normal way. They just don't conceive. It's a valid marriage and still a sanctifying state. Impotency is the inability to exercise the sexual act in a way suitable to procreation. The inability to perform the marriage act, that invalidates. So, an older couple past the age of childbearing can validly marry, as long as there's still the ability to exchange the marriage rights. If there's doubt, as there should be, all right, meaning if beforehand it's unknown, and it should be a quantity unknown because of purity, then it's always assumed it will be valid unless proven otherwise. If you run into a problem, you bring it to the priest and they sort it out, all right, whether it was valid or not. This is all considering, let's say, going into a marriage. If a couple enters marriage and everything's normal, and later physically the body starts to have difficulties, or there's a disease, or that doesn't impact the marriage at all. If your marriage was valid on the day you entered it, it's valid for life. It doesn't change that fact. All right? So it's a good question, but it's probably more than he bargained for. All right? So sterility is not an impediment to marriage. Impotency, that is anterior, so before marriage, anterior to marriage, and perpetual, that, whether it's in the man or the woman, that invalidates by the very law of nature itself, which means it cannot be dispensed. So, again, it has to be clear, impotency that's before the marriage and an impotency that's perpetual. All right, if a medical procedure will fix it, well, get the medical procedure. Fix it, and the marriage will be fine. If it's not perpetual, it's not perpetual, it's not an impediment. Yes.
I actually know of a couple, I was told of a couple who married knowing that the man was impotent, but the prayers of his family granted them a miracle. Now,
Okay.
does that mean that they have to retake?
No, if it was not perpetual, then it's not a problem.
So
The priest should have done that research beforehand. It's one of the impediments to marriage.
So there's no invalidity to the marriage because at the time that they contracted, he knew that he was impotent.
Then he should talk to his priest. Because
Sorry?
he should talk to his priest to figure out exactly what the intention was at the moment and what the situation was. Because there's not a retroactive validity either. All right? It doesn't become invalid with age, but it doesn't become valid suddenly either by by just the condition disappearing. So he'd need to talk to his priest to figure out what the order of events was.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Next point, limitations on state authority. The state or the country, the nation, it does have a certain say in marriage. Why? Because the state is composed, like any human society, on fundamental building blocks. And when it comes to the state, well, it's families. Right? That's why in the old days, for example, I think people look and say, oh, it used to be that women were not allowed to vote. I think really the idea was not that they were trying to crush women so much as that they were saying, we want the votes of those who are landholders in this country. If you own property here, we want to hear what you have to say about the government of the country. Right? And the landowners were typically families. And the head of that house was going to speak for the whole family. It shouldn't be a normal thing that mom's a Republican and dad's a Democrat, or whatever it might be. Right? In this country, it's different parties. We'll leave those out. All right. But it's normal that husband and wife are going to be on the same page about big things, and that they're going to vote as a family, so to speak. Not a problem. Now that everyone votes, fine. But the state does have some say in marriages, some concern about marriages, because these marriages are the stability or the instability of the nation. At the same time, marriage is not just a social contract. It's been elevated to the level of a sacrament by God. It's been created by God and elevated to the level of a sacrament by God. And sacraments belong to the church. So the state can make certain rules, but it has limits to its power. It is never allowed to impinge on the rights of the church over her sacraments. So when the state makes a law that's against God's law, against the church's law, then the state is wrong. And it's not a true law. So when the state, for example, claims the right to grant a divorce, a total divorce of these two validly married people, that's against God's law. The state has no right to do that. A total divorce meaning you're no longer married to one another, you can each go marry someone else. The state has no right to say that. The state can say it all at once. It changes nothing for us. Once we're married, we're married for life. And that goes for even non-Catholics. Marriage is for life. All right? So I don't want to spend a lot of time here, but it is important to see that the state has limitations to its authority. Now, there are times where the state can permit, let's say, or decree a certain legal separation. Let's say one of the married couple, one of the parties, becomes a complete alcoholic and is spending every penny of the money that the family needs to survive. Well, the state can step in and say, you are no longer responsible for his debts or for her debts. The state can do that, all right? But the individual can't seek that on their own steam. If they're Catholic, they have to approach their bishop first before they can just separate from their spouse, unless there's clear and proven adultery. If there's clear and proven, not speculated, and not something short of that, like pornography, which is terrible, but we're talking clear and proven adultery. If that happens, the innocent party is allowed to say, I know I'm married to you, and I'm married to you for life, but we will never be intimate again. I'm not saying that's the right approach, but they have that power. But once they forgive, even once, by accepting to perform the marriage act again, everything goes back to normal. The duties and the rights are like they were at the very beginning until or unless there's another repetition of a clearly proven adultery. Even adultery, though, doesn't allow total divorce where you can go get married to someone else. No, it's marriage. Marriage is for life. So I know there are going to be questions about these things towards the end of class. No problem. Jot them down, and we can try to take them at the end. All right. The last thing that I want to tie up is the difference between annulment and what the state calls divorce. All right. An annulment is not just a Catholic divorce. An annulment is not a Catholic divorce. An annulment means that at the moment that you made your vows, There was something so terribly wrong that there was never a marriage to begin with. That it was not a true marriage. It looked like a true marriage. Everyone might have thought it was a true marriage, but there was something so terribly wrong, either in the intention of one of the parties marrying, or in some delegation that was not received, or one of the parties was secretly, they were already married to someone else and their first spouse was still alive, and they never bothered to tell the priest or the one they're trying to marry now. If there's an impediment, a dearment impediment, or let's say an invalidating impediment, we'll keep it simple, if there's an invalidating impediment at the moment of the marriage, then you can get an annulment. And only then. It can't be something, well, we had such difficult times later. We had such, trying. We know, yes, it was a beautiful ceremony. We were well prepared. We knew what we were doing. But now it's not working, so we pay our fee to the church, and the church grants us an annulment. No. I'm afraid that the modern church gives out annulments way too easily. I think they have tried to curb the money issue. Fine. But they grant annulments way more easily. If you could look at the statistics, I don't have them in front of me. But the number of annulments, for example, in the last year compared to 75 years ago. Can you imagine? You mean to tell me that all these people were never truly married to begin with? What's wrong with our system if that's the case? No. Many times it's slipshod annulments. It's, well, these people are suffering, and no one likes to see a couple suffer. And it's hard when marriage falls apart or is struggling. But this is not about just the couple. This is about the human race. This is about the church. This is about the common good. And that has to come before the difficulties of individuals. All right? So as hard as it is, we have to see these things. Annulment is not a Catholic divorce. All right? And that's why when people come up and say, Father, my marriage is really difficult. Can we look into it and see if we can find an annulment? What are the causes for annulments? I'm not telling you that. If you think you have a cause for annulment, you tell me what it is, and I'll tell you if it's a possible cause or not. I'm not going to go through and give you a whole bunch of ammunition to try to figure out, can we make this null? Amazing, these people that they've got, Father Toke mentioned this in passing, they've got 8, whatever, they've been together for 20 years, they maybe got 5, 6, 10 kids, whatever, and then suddenly, when things get difficult, I'm not sure if my marriage was valid. You mean they're all illegitimate? You mean you've been living in mortal sin all this time? And you just never noticed it when you were happy? No, I'm sorry. I'm not going to be party to that. It just doesn't work that way. All right. There are real cases of annulments, and there are false cases. And if someone goes through the modern process and gets a cheap annulment and knows in their heart of heart that it's not legitimate, it's between them. At that point, they're going to have to answer to God one day. They go remarry or something, they have to answer to God. Oh, but I got the paper from the church. If you went seeking the answer you wanted, and you knew that there was no good grounds for that, don't tell me you're not going to be responsible for it. This is too serious to play games with. All right. Faith in marriage. What does the church teach about the goods of marriage? All right? What are the goods of marriage? Because there's so many. Marriage is such a beautiful thing. There are real responsibilities that come with marriage. We take responsibility because of the good things that can come from it. What are the goods? The main goods. We could name many, many benefits. But the church summarizes 3 main goods of marriage. And these are found in Costi Connubii, especially starting with paragraph 10. This is from Costi Connubii, Pope Pius XI. Now, when we come to explain, venerable brethren, what are the blessings that God has attached to true matrimony? These, says St. Augustine, are all the blessings of matrimony, on account of which matrimony itself is a blessing. Offspring, conjugal faith, and the sacrament. These are the three goods of marriage. The bonum prolis in Latin, so the good of children. The bonum fidelis, the good of fidelity. And the bonum sacramenti, the good of the sacrament. So we'll touch on each of them. They're all spelled out in Casti Connubii. And these are important because they're a summary, as Casti Connubii tells us, they're a splendid summary of the whole doctrine of Christian marriage. These three are a splendid summary of the whole doctrine of Christian marriage. The bonum fidelis, what does St. Augustine mean by the bonum fidelis? By conjugal faith. He means conjugal faith, the good of faith. It is provided by conjugal faith that there should be no carnal intercourse outside the marriage bond with another man or woman. All right? It's conjugal fidelity. You will be faithful to the other in what you have promised. Bonum prolis, with regard to offspring, that children should be begotten of love, tenderly cared for, and educated in a religious atmosphere. That's St. Augustine's summary of the good of children. The bonum sacramenti. Finally, in its sacramental aspect, that the marriage bond should not be broken, and that a husband or wife, if separated, should not be joined to another, even for the sake of offspring. So if the marriage struggles and one leaves the other, and the innocent party looks and says, but I had no children and my spouse left me, not even for the sake of offspring could they go marry someone else. They're married for life. This we regard as the law of marriage, by which the fruitfulness of marriage is adorned and the evil of incontinence is restrained. When there are great goods at stake, there are strong laws in place. You don't put a diamond, the world's largest diamond, you don't just pass it around the room and say, hey, everyone take a look. You put it in a case, and you put alarm systems. And the greater the good, the more precautions we take, the greater the good when it comes to marriage, the more the church and God, all right, makes laws to protect that good. Let's look a little more detailed at each of these goods. The bonum prolis. Again, from Casti Connubii. Thus, amongst the blessings of marriage, the child holds the first place. And indeed, the Creator of the human race himself, who in his goodness wishes to use men as his helpers in the propagation of life, taught this when, instituting marriage in paradise, he said to our first parents, and through them to all future spouses, increase and multiply and fill the earth. Marriage is for children. Increase and multiply and fill the earth. St. Augustine admirably deduces from the holy words of the Apostle St. Paul to Timothy when he says, the Apostle himself is therefore a witness that marriage is for the sake of generation. I wish, he says, this is St. Paul he's quoting, I wish, he says, young girls to marry. And as if someone said to him, why? He immediately adds, to bear children, to be mothers of families. The encyclical goes on to point out the great benefit that children are because of the dignity of each one of these little ones. They have the human nature. Their human nature, their being is worth more than all the rest of visible creation put together. They have intellect and free will. They can love God. They have an eternal soul that's infused by God. Husband and wife, they cooperate. But obviously, it's not every time that they're intimate that they have a child. No, it's when God chooses to use their cooperation and to infuse of his own will a child, the soul of a child. The parents provide the matter. God provides the form every time that it happens. This is a tremendous work. A cooperation at which moment he doesn't create the soul of this child out of something else. Oh, well, we got these old misused souls. We'll reuse that one, clean it up. No, from scratch, out of nothing, he makes a soul. He creates a soul. And the condition he puts is that there are generous parents. And then he chooses. What a grace. What a blessing to be able to be the father or the mother of eternal beings. The body will die, but that soul will last forever and ever and ever and ever. And of course, God intends not only that they beget life for this and fill this earth, much more, that they may be worshipers of God. Kasti Kanubi says, right, the Pope says, that they might be worshipers of God. You want to fill heaven with your children. Your family should be the nursery of heaven. Right? This school should be filled with your children. Right? To the point that we have to go buy another building or add on 7 stories or whatever we have to do. Right? But that's it. It's not just to have children. It's to bring those children to their knees before God. And to really, marriage is in a very special way fulfilled when you can bring your child to the communion rail for their first communion. You've brought your child first to the baptismal font, and that's a parent's job, normally within 8 days of birth, to bring that child to the priest for baptism. At least within 2 weeks. Many moral theologians say if you wait more than a month, through your own fault and negligence, it's a mortal sin for parents. Now, usually within 8 days to the font. The child can't walk there himself, but he can't go to heaven without it. So he needs mom and dad to get him there. And if mom can't make it for some reason, she's still healing after 8 days, and dad, bring that child. And mom, all right, welcome the child with a big kiss when he comes home, because now he's the son of God. Not just your child, but now a son of God. Of course we want mom to be there. But this is not about family and friends and parties, and that's all secondary. This is about God and this soul that he created. Many abuses in that area these days. How few priests teach the Catholic doctrine on baptism these days. So many people don't even know. All right, so you bring them to the baptismal font, and then you bring them again to confession. Mom prepares that first confession with the child, and then brings them to the communion rail, sends them up to the communion rail to receive, to be united to, in a special way, God himself, our Lord Jesus Christ. Those are the highlights of marriage. Both husband and wife, however, this is from Kasti Kanubi, both husband and wife, however, receiving these children with joy and gratitude from the hand of God, will regard them as a talent committed to their charge by God. A talent, meaning like the coin, it's given, it's entrusted to you, you must use it, you must develop it, and you must give it back to God. You must give the child back to God. These children are not your own. They're God's children. He entrusts them to you. He lets them see him through you. But those children always belong to him first. And you must one day return them to him. That's why when a child dies young, rather than turning against God in some sort of anger or hatred, no, you must thank God for the time, however short it was, that God lent that child to you. And I've buried children, and it's not an easy thing. But how beautiful when you know that they're in heaven. Receiving these children with joy and gratitude from the hand of God will regard them as a talent committed to their charge by God, not only to be employed for their own advantage or for that of an earthly commonwealth, but to be restored to God with interest on the day of reckoning. That's Pope Pius XI. The blessing of offspring, however, is not completed by the mere begetting of them, but something else must be added, namely the proper education of the offspring. So there are going to be some talks on proper education of our children. Even the conferences that are given about the liturgical life in the home. It's an education we're trying to give in the home. There's formal education at school and all that. And there's the informal in the home. That's part of education. Now it is certain, again it's the Pope, now it is certain that both by the law of nature and of God, this right and duty of educating their offspring belongs in the first place to those who began the work of nature by giving them birth. And they are indeed forbidden to leave unfinished this work and so expose it to certain ruin. The parents have the duty and the obligation, all right, the right and the duty of educating their offspring. Doesn't mean that they have to do it all on their own, but the duty falls first and foremost to them. So if the state ever tries to come in and say, we have a right to train your children no matter what you say, they're wrong. And it has happened in history. It doesn't mean you can't seek help. It doesn't mean that you're not also the children of the church. So of course the church can advise you on what to do. Sure. But you have to be your own, you have to take the cause and fight for the cause of your own children's education and formation. All right, so yes, the children are a great blessing. That's the words of the encyclical. I would say as well, you could talk about it in many ways. The beauty, families that are blessed with children, what a blessing for a mother and a father. You look at these young couples, for example. They get married, and the other person is their whole world, and that's the way it should be. And then they have their first child, and they see their love incarnate. Their married love has taken flesh and has its own little temperament and personality, right? And that soul will live forever. Your world has just doubled and tripled and quadrupled. Every child. You will learn things about your spouse through your child because you'll look and say, that's just like your dad. That's true. That is how he is. I know how to handle this. Maybe I need to change approach over here. All right? Why this works with him? Maybe it would work. I don't know. You learn things about each other. You learn things about yourself. You look and go, someone walks up and goes, oh, they look just like you. Really? They don't even have hair. Or the features. I didn't know I looked like that. And you learn about yourself. Right? And you learn about the combinations. You learn why your temperament with your spouse's temperament tends sometimes to rub a little. Because you get a child with something of that mix and look at that tumult inside. All right? The children are a great blessing. And they bind the couple together. Now, sometimes, in God's mysterious ways, He doesn't send children. Those marriages can still be very beautiful. They have a special sacrifice to offer. But they can be very beautiful. Right? But when children are granted, that's a gift. And every child's a gift. And we need to thank God again and again for those gifts. We can't take that for granted. It's not a guarantee that you're going to get married and have a large family. That's up to God. You can get married, but the size of your family, that's up to God. You have to be free, open to all the children God sends. But you can't determine the number. God knows. God knows. It's a beautiful dependence upon our Creator. Right? And that's it. A mother, what does she do? We know that every time a mother gives birth, every time she goes through labor, in a certain sense, she takes her life in her hands. Things have gotten safer these days because of medical advances and all, but still, in a certain way, she takes her life in her hands and she offers her life. If you want me, Lord, I will lay down my life to bring another into the world, if that's what you ask of me. She lays down her life every time, and then she picks up this life in a resurrection in her child. Offspring is certainly a beautiful blessing of marriage. We could go on and on. All right? Bonum fidelis. By conjugal faith, it is provided that there should be no carnal intercourse outside the marriage bond with another man or woman. That's St. Augustine's summary. Let's look at Costi Connubii's summary. The second blessing of matrimony. which we said was mentioned by St. Augustine, is the blessing of conjugal honor, which consists in the mutual fidelity of the spouses, in fulfilling the marriage contract, so that what belongs to one of the parties by reason of this contract, sanctioned by divine law, may not be denied to him or permitted to any third person. What's just been said there? It means you've made a contract, you've given yourself to the other for the acts proper to procreation. You cannot deny him, or he cannot deny her, that marriage act when it's lawfully, when it's seriously and reasonably requested. Obligation, until death do you part. Denial of the marriage rights through selfishness is mortal sin. Yes, they have rights. Yes, they have blessings. They have, let's say, they have privileges. They also have obligations to the other. These couples that run into marriage thinking, oh, but we're in love and everything's going to always be easy. No, it's not. Men and women are made very differently in these areas. We'll have to come back to this when it comes to the do's and don'ts of marriage. All right, so may not be denied to him or permitted to any third person. You can't share those rights with anyone else on earth. Nor may there be conceded to one of the parties anything which, being contrary to the rights and laws of God and entirely opposed to matrimonial faith, can never be conceded. So, one of the parties, let's say in marriage, one of the Catholic parties is selfish and says, I don't want any more children, but I do want intimacy. So, too bad for you, I'm using contraception. You can't concede to that. You can't give in to that. If there's something if there's a frustration of the natural end at the last moment outside your control, that's not your sin. But if you know from the start that she's on the pill, you can't. You cannot exchange the marriage rights. Similarly, if it's something like that on the man's side from the start. And details when you talk to your confessor. No, matrimonial fidelity means fidelity to God's law, these ends of marriage that God has established and that our will has to conform to, because he writes the terms of the contract, as we saw last time. By matrimony, therefore, the souls of the contracting parties, husband and wife, by matrimony, Pope Pius XI says, by matrimony, therefore, the souls of the contracting parties are joined and knit together more directly and more intimately than are their bodies. And that not by any passing affection of sense or spirit, but by a deliberate and firm act of the will. And from this union of souls, by God's decree, a sacred and inviolable bond arises. Marriage unites in a certain way the souls of the husband and wife. You'll still have your own judgment before God, but part of your judgment will now include, did your spouse get to heaven? Did you do everything in your power, including massive amounts of patience? Did you do everything within your power to get them to heaven? If you can't say yes, you're going to be found at fault. All right? So, it's a benefit. This fidelity means all your life you know there's one who belongs to you and you belong to them. You know that you are free from your own selfishness because you have someone else you have to live for. You have to sacrifice for. And they, back to you. Marriage fidelity is a tremendous blessing. But it comes, you have to pay, you have to invest in it. Happy marriages don't just happen. Happy marriages come to those who work for their marriages and who pray to God for the blessings they need. St. Augustine calls this the faith of chastity. Fidelity, the faith of chastity. And it blooms more freely, more beautifully, and more nobly when it is rooted in that more excellent soil, the love of husband and wife, which pervades all the duties of the married life and holds pride of place in Christian marriage. The encyclical is quite detailed here. You can go into it. It is beautiful. Here, the Pope Pius XI would explain the roles of husband and wife, the distinct but complementary roles of husband and wife. That's for another conference altogether. We're going to have a conference on the role of husband, the role of wife later on. This is from Bishop Henry du Toit, which I found in this Catholic family book, which many of you I think have already purchased. Beautiful reflections on conjugal fidelity. Conjugal love's true name is fidelity, fides. You remain faithful to one another, no matter what happens. That you don't leave, you don't break the bond, you don't look for another, you don't build a wall to protect your heart. No, you're one. If therefore, he goes on, if therefore something that lasts, it is therefore, conjugal love's true name is fidelity, fides. It is therefore something that lasts and that feeds off motives that do not change, is more than the sensible fervor that blazes for but a moment, more than even the truest and most sincere words that blow away like the wind. It is an interior flame that a cloud can cover for a moment, but that does not go out. It springs from a profound esteem that respects everything in the beloved that comes from God. The gifts of nature and grace, everything added on by virtue that is perhaps imperfect, but that constantly strives to improve. Their need to complete themselves through each other makes each feel dependent on the other in turn. There's a mutual dependence of spouses. Right? It's a book worth reading, especially as you get a little ways into it, and then it just kind of it grabs hold. All right, the Bonum Sacramenti. Rather than go into detail from the angle of Pope Pius XI, which we could do, I wish we had time. All right, but I'll summarize it because we're starting to run short, and I want to get to your questions and things. So, what do we mean by the good of the sacrament? Well, marriage is elevated from just being a natural bond, a sacred but natural bond, to being a sacrament. Now, a sacrament means it gives grace. It unites you to the passion of Christ, unites you to God, the sacrament of matrimony, and it signifies. It produces what it signifies. So what does it signify? Well, when you say I do, you signify a union of lives, and it produces a union of your souls, a union of your lives, in a way that I would say is far beyond even that of natural marriage. What you receive through the sacrament of matrimony is another world compared to just natural marriage. Even if that was a sacred thing on its own, on a natural sacred reality. This is a sacrament. It gives you an increase in God's life. It gives you a guarantee to the graces that you're going to need to be able to be an excellent spouse and father or mother. And those graces are promised not just on the day of the matrimony, but every day of your married life. You can ask God, Lord, please, I've entered this state. You've blessed my marriage. I need those blessings today. And you kiss your wedding band again. A sacramental, blessed on the day of your wedding. It's like your scapular. It's a sacramental. And every time you kiss that wedding band, all right, in a certain sense, you stir up those graces of your marriage day. What else does it signify? St. Paul speaks about this is a great sacrament. I speak in Christ and in the church. What does he mean? It means that your marriages are a sign to the world of how much Christ loves his church and how closely the church follows Christ. Your marriages you're meant to be like living icons of this marriage bond between Christ and his church, through whom children are born at the baptismal font. So, in other words, the world should be able to look and say, how much does Christ love the church? As much as Mr. So-and-so, Mr. Catholic, loves Mrs. Catholic. As much as he loves his wife. And how far is the church willing to serve and follow after Christ? As much and as generously as Mrs. Catholic follows her husband. That's what it's supposed to be. And that's why, because it's a sacrament, it's also is always meant to be indissoluble. All right? That's always been the ideal as God created it. But now, it's even more, because Christ will never abandon his church, and the church as such will never abandon Christ. And therefore, that bond is permanent, and the sacramental bond of marriage is absolutely permanent until death do you part. It's indissoluble because of what it represents on top of the nature of things. All right. Marriage is a sacrament. All right? It's different from the natural contract of matrimony. They're worlds apart. But natural contract is still real. So two pagans who get married in front of the justice of the peace, if they've never been married before and they have the intentions properly, sufficiently to have a valid marriage, it's a valid marriage and it's for life. Two Protestants in front of a Protestant minister. It's a marriage for life. If their baptisms were actually valid, it's a sacrament too, because of the fact that they're able to receive it. Problem being that their schism puts them objectively in mortal sin. So their marriage will be a sacrilege. Because to receive a sacrament in the state of mortal sin is a sacrilege. And it blocks the graces that are supposed to come. Catholic marriages are unlike any in the world. Now, we can't judge the inside of an individual soul. There may be invincible ignorance and all the rest. All right, we don't have to go into that now. But objectively, Protestants who are adults have chosen to live in a state, in a false religion. All right, a truly false religion, therefore separate from Christ, separate from grace. All right, objectively. Marriage is a sacrament of the living. It presupposes the state of grace. So what if a couple gets married here at the altar and one of them is in mortal sin and the other doesn't know it? Is it a valid marriage? Yes, thank God. Or you'd never know if your marriage was valid. You can't read the heart of the other person. It's a valid marriage, but it's a sacrilege for the one who's in mortal sin. It's valid. It doesn't have to be redone. It binds for life. But one receives the graces and the other, those graces are stopped at the door. And until they make a good confession, they can't receive them. All right? They can't receive the graces of matrimony. They're married, but they don't receive the helps that they need. All right? That's why we often encourage the couples before marriage. All right? We often encourage them to make a general confession of their whole life. But certainly they need to be in the state of grace. We say, well, look, go to confession. Before marriage, make a good confession. Why a general confession of their whole life? Because if you don't fix those things, if you don't look at them carefully, if you don't look at your problems carefully, your spouse is going to have to deal with all that. There's a pattern of misbehavior in our lives, and we've got to know what it is, or our spouse and our children are going to have to deal with that. So a general confession is a big help, and a great grace to get back on our feet. Our general confession doesn't mean you tell the other person. General confession means you tell the priest the sins of your whole life. Right? Not that you do it publicly. Please don't do that. In fact, we don't usually advise that. Right? We don't necessarily advise that you reveal all your secret faults to your spouse before you get married. Right? That can end up causing more trouble than good in many cases. All right? Especially later on if things get tough. You told me you had a problem with this. Is this coming up again? It's so easy to use those things as leverage later on. So, be careful, be honest, be open, but you're not each other's confessors. And you don't have a right to ask explicitly, are you in mortal sin? Not even married people can do that to each other. Why didn't you go to communion today? Oh, you can't ask that. No, forbidden. All right, so it's a sacrament. That means there must be a minister. Who's the minister of the sacrament of matrimony? The couple, the husband and the wife. The priest is not the minister. He's not making the contract. He's witnessing the contract on behalf of the church, and he needs to be there. But the ministers are the husband and the wife. They give each other, by their consent, grace. Like a priest gives communion or pours the water. You are the ministers of the sacrament. The form is the I do, or in Latin, volo. Right? The I do. What's the matter? Because matter and form for sacraments, I'm going to give you what the moral theology books say. All right? We're adults, we can deal with this. We have to know. What's the matter of the sacrament? The remote matter, the bodies of the spouses. Can't give what you don't have. If you're going to be giving yourself to the other for procreation, it implies something. The proximate matter, the grant of the mutual conjugal rights, externally manifested, that external consent that we talked about. Question, can I go to my friend's wedding? Can I go to the reception? Right? It comes down to the same thing, really. If you can't go to the wedding, you can't go to the reception. If you just don't want to go to the wedding, that's a different thing. You might go to the reception. I want the party, but I don't really want to go through the ceremony. If it's just a choice, that's a different. But if you can't go to the wedding, you can't go to the reception. Because if you can't go to the wedding, it's because there's something terribly wrong. And you're going to go celebrate it afterwards? No. This is not popular, but this needs to be said. All right? Can I go to my friend's wedding? Even my, it could be a sibling, it could be whatever, someone really close to us. Can I go to my friend's wedding? Yes, as long as it is one, valid. If it's not going to be a valid marriage, you can't go. 2, licit. 3, that means legal according to canon law. Right, so valid, licit. 3, with no risk to one's own faith. And 4, no scandal. Scandal to others, scandal to the couple. Right, so let's look at some scenarios. 2 people getting married. One of them is Catholic, baptized Catholic, and he's getting married outside the church. Can you go? He's a really close relative. He's getting married outside the church. That's invalid. As the church law stands, that's invalid. You can't go. Oh, but it's going to be family feud. Better that than offend God. Better to have your family turn against you than for you to turn against God. It's not about just convenience. No one likes to say these things. No one likes to do these things. But we have to. We cannot condone an invalid marriage. Oh, well, I'm just going to go and sit in the back and then go to the party. And, well, all right, I won't even go to the wedding. I'll just go to the reception. And celebrate the fact that they're going to begin today officially a life of sin together. Because if it's an invalid marriage, it's 2 people living in sin. We're going to condone that and then say, I'm not at fault. We can't. Doesn't matter how closely related they are to us. Doesn't matter how many the difficulties. And I know what I'm saying. This does cause big difficulty in families. But you have to stand for Christ. Why would these couples ever sort it out later on if someone doesn't say, I can't be there. I'd love to be there for you. I don't want to hurt you. I love you, but I love you so much, I cannot approve something that's going to send you to hell. I love you too much to do that. Don't ask me to be there. I can't. And you can always blame it on your priest. I went to a catechism class once in Rockdale, and the priest told me, hey, go ahead. I'll take the blame. So Catholics, a Catholic getting married outside the church, no go. 2 people getting married, one of whom was married before and whose spouse is still alive, no go. Oh, but they got civilly married because they weren't Catholic. And then they got a civil divorce. The church, the state can civilly marry them, the state cannot civilly divorce them because God's law is greater than the state law. But that other marriage, if there's no true annulment, and you have to assume it's true unless proven otherwise, you can't get into everyone else's business, but if there's no true annulment, you can't be there if they were already married and that other person's still alive. Obviously, if it's a marriage against nature, you cannot be there. All right? Same-sex unions, you cannot be there. You cannot celebrate it. In fact, Pope Pius XI makes clear, I wish I could find the exact quote. Just a moment. No, I don't see it, but there it is. Paragraph 8 of Casti Connubii. From this, it is clear that legitimately constituted authority has the right and therefore the duty to restrict, to prevent, and to punish those base unions which are opposed to reason and to nature. Unquote. That's not fiducia supplicans, that's Casti Connubii. Someone had a question? Yes. If a Catholic marries a Muslim in the church, is it a valid marriage? If the priest agreed to witness it and had the delegation to do so, it's what we'd call a disparity of cult marriage. There would have to be a special dispensation. Without the dispensation, it would be invalid. But if the dispensation was given, which could be, it's not something that's given easily, but if it was given, it would be valid. Yeah, but it would be not a sacrament, according to most theologians, not even for the Catholic party, because the Muslim is not baptized. So how can you have a sacrament for one, but not for the other? One baptized, one not. How can you have a sacrament, a one-sided marriage sacrament? Right? It can be valid, but it doesn't mean it's valid. It doesn't mean it's a sacrament. Yeah. All right. So we've got the minister, the form, the matter, the question of the friends. What if it... All right. So it comes down to, so if it's valid, one can attend, all right, with those other conditions in mind. All right, if it's linked to a non-Catholic ceremony, let's say two Protestants getting married in a Protestant church and you're close to them and can I go? You can't go participate in their liturgy. No, you can't, but you can be there for the civil side of the marriage, like a funeral, all right? You can be there more present, passively, in the back, for example, praying your rosary, all right? You witness that it's a true marriage, all right? But you're not participating in all the surrounding, like, let's say, liturgies, Protestant services that go around it, right? It's passive attendance is permitted when it's valid, and it's licit, and there's no risk to your faith, and there's no scandal. All right, if one of those is missing, you can't go. Proper process of marriage. All right, there would normally be a marriage investigation, first of all. The state would have some paperwork. The church would have some paperwork. We'd go through and investigate. Are you free to marry? Do you have any impediments? All right, it takes some time. I did marriage paperwork today for a couple, all right, for one party of the couple. All right, so it takes some time. You go through everything, establish, and then send it off to authorities to approve and stamp and say, yep, you can go ahead with that marriage. In this case, for us, what canonical form for marriage, all right, according to canon law, only those marriages are valid which are contracted before the local ordinary, that's the bishop, pastor, or a priest or deacon delegated by either of them, who assist and before two witnesses according to the rules expressed in the following canons and without prejudice to the such and such exception. All right, so marriage, you have to have jurisdiction to do the marriage. The jurisdiction comes typically from the bishop to the pastors of the parish. All right, in our cases, what do? Every time we do a marriage here, we put together the paperwork for the state. We put together the paperwork for the Archdiocese of Sydney. And we put together the paperwork for our own internal use, which is more detailed than the diocese, I can tell you that, all right? And we send off the paperwork to the diocese and say, can we get your delegation? So that everyone will recognize that this marriage is valid. Can we get that delegation? We send off our paperwork off to our superiors to get their stamp of approval as well. Now, because the bishops these days, in general, will work with us in that way without any strings attached, without asking us to compromise on our faith, well, we ask for that delegation. And it's a very good thing. We are not against the hierarchy of the church. We just are not willing to compromise our faith. But if they ever took that from us, if they ever said, I won't give you permission to marry because you're the Society of St. Pius X, we would have supply jurisdiction. I fly to Fiji for Holy Week to give them the Holy Week ceremonies. Right after Holy Week, I've got 3 marriages there that I will have to bless. None of them with permission of the bishop, because the bishop is against tradition and we can't get delegation. They will be valid marriages based on supply jurisdiction. And based on canon law. Based on canon law. This is the new code of canon law. Canon 1116. If a person competent to assist according to the norm of law cannot be present or approached without grave inconvenience. These couples can't just approach their Novus Ordo priest unless they want Novus Ordo classes, weak on doctrine, if not wrong on doctrine, and a Novus Ordo ceremony. So there is a grave inconvenience, which means they can't approach their normal pastor, their local priest. If a person competent to assist according to the norm of law cannot be present or approached without grave inconvenience, those who intend to enter into a true marriage can contract it validly and licitly before witnesses only. 1, this can be done in danger of death. Witnesses only. 1, in danger of death. 2, outside the danger of death, provided that it is prudently foreseen that the situation will continue for a month. The fact that for more than these people in Fiji who want to get married in the traditional rite, who want to get married in Catholic tradition, they know that they can wait more than a month and the bishop's not going to change his mind. They're going to still be asked to compromise. They can go ahead without it. I tell you this not because we don't usually have to do this, not that you're going to probably have to face this, but if one day things go sour with Rome again, if we have to go back to this, we'll go back to this. It still happens in extraordinary cases. This is the first time I've had to do one of these marriages for many years because all the bishops give us delegation. And once in a while you get someone like this. I'll pray I don't know him. Pray for the Bishop of Fiji, I guess. I would say it's an abuse of power. The Pope has asked that he consider. Yes?
In that case of supply jurisdiction, do you still send documents to Rome or to anywhere?
In a case like that, no, we'd just be grinding the axe. Because if you're going to send him anywhere, you send him to your bishop, to that bishop. So we wouldn't send him something that he is just going to throw a fit about. We'd file everything. We'd send it to our district superior, to the district headquarters. We'd make sure we have a copy, and there's an extra copy. So if our building burns down, there's another copy. Yeah. But no, this is it. People look and go, but how can you do that? There are souls that all souls need the tradition of the church. We can't deprive them of that. It's not right for the bishop to be insisting that they compromise with the Novus Ordo in order to get married. That's outside their scope of power. But that's what's happening because of the crisis. Right? So this is not a new issue. All right? There are lots of articles written about it. Now, there would also be marriage classes, between 3 and 8 marriage classes. All right? More if it was clear that the basic catechism wasn't already understood. All right? What if you were married? We had this question that come up on one of the comments on the online recordings of our conferences. What if I got married outside the Catholic Church? What if I'm Catholic, got married outside the Catholic Church, and therefore it was not valid, and now I want to fix it? What do I do? Is there any way? Yes. All right. contact us or go to your priest, tell them your situation, and we would look at the situation and say, all right, are you free to marry? And what do we have to do in order to get you to the point of marriage? How do we get this rectified? How do we convalidate your marriage? It wasn't valid before. How do we make it valid? And what do we have to do in the meantime as far as separating sufficiently so that there's not a proximate occasion of serious sin? There may be children involved. There may be... So each time the pastor has to look and make sure there's as much separation as possible under the circumstances to be able to safeguard the purity of the couple until we can get them married. But it happens. I've done many of those. This is not a rare thing these days. It should be, but it's not. I've done many of those marriages. And they can be happy marriages later when they sort things out and do things right. It takes sacrifice, it takes effort, but it's worth it. These couples are very happy afterwards that they did the right thing. All right, there's marriage paperwork and certificates proving that you're free to marry. Marriage bans announced from the pulpit. That's the old way. All right, the new way, they don't take that so seriously. All right, there's the rite of marriage, which I'd like to go into. I think I will, and then I'll take questions, although I know I'm running late again. All right, so very quickly, the rite of marriage and the nuptial blessing. The essential rite consists in the words of consent spoken by the bride and the groom. The assisting priest asks for this consent, and then he blesses the newly married pair, except in mixed marriages. No blessing for mixed marriages. The priest doesn't bless a marriage between a Catholic and a Protestant. The priest may witness it with the proper permissions. Traditionally, it was an impediment to marry a Protestant. It's still called a pastoral concern in the new Code of Canon Law. But when it is approved for some extraordinary cause, when it is approved to witness the marriage, the priest does not bless the marriage. He does not bless the rings. Neither. It's a mixed marriage. All right, I'm taking this out of the McEwen-Cullen, A Complete Course of Moral Theology, all right, from 1930. This is the mind of the church, even if you may find all sorts of variations in the modern church. Marriage by sign language or through an interpreter or proxy is not lawful without special permission. You can marry by proxy validly, but it's not lawful without special permission. And marriage by letter is not recognized. It's out of the Moral Theology book, yes.
So, Father, technically, if I was on the moon and I wanted to get married remotely, that could be accepted?
By proxy with permission. But I don't think you can marry by screen. I can't hear your confession by screen. All right, you could have your friend stand in your place and say, he does. I mean, I do. All right? You could delegate someone to speak for you. All right, just don't let him kiss the bride.
Would you have to be at the
Which
same
doesn't
location?
happen in the liturgy of the church, by the way. There is no kiss of the bride in church. You can do that in the parish hall afterwards or outside.
Would you need to be in the same location?
No, not if you're by proxy. But you can only do that with special permission. Otherwise, it's unlawful. Right? So don't get any ideas. It's like, yeah, I'm really camera shy. I don't like big crowds. I can't turn up to my own marriage. I mean, who does that? Right?
Actually, I know a couple of
Jonna, you amaze me. Well, it's in the Moral Theology books. It must have happened, or someone must have tried at some point. All right. If the essential rite are the words spoken by the bride and groom, the accidental rite, meaning the extras, all right, is the nuptial blessing bestowed during the nuptial mass that follows on the marriage. This too is omitted in mixed marriages, and also during Advent and Lent. All right. The way the church words it is, the church abhors mixed marriages. And the priest is obliged to speak about this on a regular basis, warning the faithful, do not marry a non-Catholic. We're obliged, all right? Abhors mixed marriages. All right, let me just finish here. The place for the marriage is regularly in the parish church, if it's a Catholic marriage, but outside the church, if it's a mixed marriage. You can go, but I thought Catholics had to marry in the church. If one of them's Catholic and one of them's not, doesn't have to be in the church. Not in the church building. It has to be blessed. It has to be witnessed by the church. But let me read that again. The place for the marriage is regularly in the parish church if it is a Catholic marriage. But outside the church, we're talking in the parish hall or the sacristy or the parish office, if it's a mixed marriage. Someone who insists, Father, I really want to marry this non-Catholic. I really want, and there's all these big reasons why I really need to do this. If the church ends up giving permission, I would say, if you follow the traditional teachings, then you should kiss goodbye all your dreams of a white dress walking down the aisle in the church, because such a marriage is not something the church is proud of, so she hides it in a certain way. She doesn't bless it like other marriages. She doesn't have a mass. She doesn't put it in the church traditionally. You see how this is serious. These couples, this includes the Greek Orthodox. If they're not Catholic, if they're schismatic, it's not to be done in the church. We need to know these things early on before you give your heart away. No one's trying to hurt anyone else. It's a safeguard for marriage. This is such a beautiful and a wonderful and a critical thing that the church makes strong laws to protect it. We've already talked a little bit about the wedding dresses and for the bride and the bridesmaids, that they are to be modest. They are to speak of fidelity and not of licentious vanity. You're not marrying everyone in the church. They don't have a right to see your body in that way. You can be beautiful. You must be beautiful, but modest. Most modern wedding dresses these days are anything but modest. And I see in the Catholic Register, as you do at times, the Catholic Register of the area, pictures of weddings or brides, scandalous the way they're dressed. They should not be allowed in the church like that. They should have to submit their wedding dress for approval to their pastor or to the bishop before. It wouldn't be the bishop, but to whoever's doing the wedding. Because again, are you going to be faithful to him? Well, then show that you are reserved for him. Veil your face walking down the aisle, but then show everything. No. You're for him. And he's for you. And then your first public act after your marriage vows and your mass, your marriage mass, nuptial mass, your first public act outside the church is going to be a reception. Don't make a mess of it. Don't have a Catholic marriage and then a pagan reception with, rock music and rap music and people, drunk and dancing in pagan ways. And no. Why would you invite Christ to your wedding but throw him out of your reception? I walked out on a reception before. It was one of the saddest moments. I had prepared that couple. I thought they were ready. And already during the ceremony, I thought, the ceremony, I'm sure that was valid. But I was so disappointed. I was so disappointed in some of the things I saw surrounding the marriage. And then I went to the reception, and I got there, and it was still the informal section, informal part before grace was said before meals. And it was tragic. The music was blaring, and it was not Catholic music at all. And the bride and the bridesmaids had taken off whatever they had for coverings, and they were all strapless and getting pictures and all the rest. And I stood there and I thought, we've talked about all this. And I waited a little while, maybe 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and finally I called over the best man, the brother of the groom. Right? And I said, I'm sorry, I can't stay here. This isn't Catholic. When the groom asks where Father is so that I can lead grace before meals, you just tell him, Father wasn't comfortable, he went home. Father wasn't comfortable, he left. I'm not going to make a scene, but this is too disappointing. And I went and I found a little restaurant right up the road, and I sat down and I thought, this is miserable. Please don't do that to your priests, all right? That couple, I hope and pray that they have ended up with a beautiful marriage. I don't hold a grudge towards them, but it's a story that shows just, I'm sure they've matured with time. I'm sure they regret some of those things, hopefully all of those things, but don't do that. That's not Catholic. We respect marriage. We respect what it stands for. All right. I am way over time. If anyone needs to slip away, feel free. Otherwise, I'll keep fielding questions for a while.
I know a couple that one of them has been granted a petrine
Privilege. Yes.
So is that an annulment? Is that a certain type of annulment?
No, petrine, well, you might call it that. Petrine privilege, like a Pauline privilege, is a very special thing, a very special power of the Church, based on the fact, if we want to make it in a very general terms, based on the fact that the faith is of even more importance than a natural contract of marriage. The Catholic faith is more important than a natural contract. So that would be two pagans, for example, unbaptized people who got married to each other lawfully, and then one of them converts and wants to become Catholic, does become Catholic, all right, and the other won't live with them as a Catholic, won't let them practice their Catholic faith, all right, then that would be the Pauline privilege, in fact, where they could marry a Catholic in the Church. All right, and we know it can happen because St. Paul talks about it, and I think it's Corinthians. So we wouldn't dare make up these things, but when God has made it clear that there's faith above natural, right? Whereas the sacrament of matrimony, absolutely indissoluble. Only time that there could be a permission from the Pope for two Catholics who stood at the altar and made their vows. All right, two Catholics who made their vows. All right, only time that the Church could step in and say that they could marry another is if that marriage was never consummated. All right, so for example, if they went, you've just said I do, he just said I do, all right, or it goes the other way around, and then in comes his military captain and says, it's war, get on your horse, it's time to go off to battle. And off he goes to battle, all right, you never got to go to the reception, you never got to go home together, there was never a consummation of the marriage, and off he goes to battle and is never seen or heard from again. And you don't know if he's alive or dead. The Church in that case could grant you, all right, permission to marry again.
Does there have to be a lapse of time before?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that it's not going to be an easy thing. All right, I've never had to deal with one, so I don't know exactly the time. But yeah, I mean, the Church isn't going to jump into it. But yes. All right. Other questions? All right, well, let's see if we got a few others just before we go there. Any other questions? Nothing? Yes?
Father, so if it's a Catholic marrying outside of the Church, we can't attend the wedding. But what if it's two, secular people getting married? Can we attend the ceremony?
If it's valid. If it's going to be a valid natural contract at least, then you could attend. Well, but so if they're two non-Catholics, they could have a civil wedding and be validly married. The question is going to be, is there any other reason it wouldn't be valid? If they're saying, we'll never have any children, that's going to be an invalid marriage, you can't go. If one of them has been married before and their first spouse is still alive, then you can't go. But if there's no other reason, if really they can go, well, they're both free to marry, they both intend to marry for life, neither of them's Catholic, they're getting married outside the Church, well, yeah, they're not going to we wouldn't marry them here. We can only marry our own parishioners, all right? So we couldn't do their marriage even if they asked. So yes, you could go, all right? You wouldn't participate in any religious ceremony surrounding it, all right? Meaning, if they had a liturgy right afterwards, you wouldn't participate in that.
So if it was, two Buddhists getting married, we couldn't go to their wedding?
Oh, you could. If it's going to be a valid marriage, you could go for the civil side, just like you could go to their burial.
But if they have the faggot or a temple to get married, we couldn't.
Well, you could.
You could.
Yeah, you just kneel in the back. As long as you're, but again, remember, if it's valid, if it's licit, and so far both of those are true, all right, in this case, if it's valid, if it's licit, if there's no danger to your faith, so if you're stepping into a Buddhist temple is going to weaken your faith because of all the surroundings, well then don't go. Then you'd be forbidden. But Or if it's going to weaken someone else's faith, your children are going to be scandalized. That's the last one, scandal. But if you look and go, no, it's like a funeral. I'm not there for the liturgy at all. I'm just witnessing they're married. I would say in a case like that, that's the type of thing where I would just go to the reception and not go to the, to this other building. But you could, yeah.
And in the case of an Orthodox wedding,
Yeah.
Orthodox getting married, can we go to the church?
So two Orthodox getting married, yes. You couldn't participate, but you could go to the church as long as under those same conditions, right? If one of them is Catholic, you cannot. Now, this is a nuance. The law of the church as it stands now, and it's changed over the history, so you have to know your canon law in order before you start saying you're not validly married. You got married outside the church? All right, you're invalidly married. If they're a young person, then you can say that. But if they have any age to them, if they have any gray hair, all right, you can't just say that because the laws of the church have changed and then changed back since the crisis has begun. It's a mess. I could go through it with you, but it's not worth it right here. All right, I don't think you want to know all that. But so now, if someone marries outside the church, if a Catholic marries outside the church, the rule is once a Catholic, always a Catholic. You get married outside the church, it's not valid. All right? It's not valid. All right? But if it's a Catholic getting married outside the church to an Orthodox, to an Eastern Rite schismatic, and with their liturgy and their priest, the new Code of Canon Law says it's illicit. Illicit, so mortal sin for them and for those who attend. It's mortal sin, but it's valid. Now, I'm not going to say I like that nuance. I think it causes more confusion than help, but that's the law of the church as it stands. We don't have to like the new code, but when it comes to these things, the church has the power to change them. We have to say, all right, well, if someone came to me and said, I got married in an Orthodox church in front of an Orthodox priest in an Orthodox rite, I'm Catholic, but he was not, am I validly married? I'd say yes. Yes, because that's what canon. If you got married since 1983, which is when the new Code of Canon Law came in, then yes, it's valid. It was mortal sin. You shouldn't have done it. If you were the parents of that bride and groom, you couldn't go to the wedding, but it's valid, right? And then, of course, there can be these situations where you're on a desert island and canonical form is dispensed with because there's no priest anywhere, right? But yeah, I mean, we're talking the normal situation. Yep.
Father, I had friends years ago that got married, but they had a civil marriage first because the society priest that married them didn't have a marriage license. So is that something that they had witnesses and things like that, so at their civil service?
So we're allowed to follow state laws. There are some countries where the state obliges that the civil ceremony, the civil exchange of vows takes place before the religious. It's not the way it should be. The state is overstepping its bounds. But there are times, and I've never been in a country like that or a situation like that, but if memory serves, I could be wrong, but if memory serves, if that was the situation we had to do in order for it to be recognized, then we would say, you make your civil promises, vows, knowing that it is not a true marriage because you're Catholic. You're not intending to simulate a marriage. It's just the civil requirements. And then you keep well distant from each other until we can get your marriage blessed in the church. Yeah. But no, normally speaking, we go through we do fulfill all the civil requirements too, but the church requirements are meant to come first. All right? Now, what about a couple that says, we got married in the church, all right, we got married by the priest, but my relatives they're Methodists, and it would mean a lot to them if we also did our vows in front of their minister. For the couple to get married validly in the church, and then either before or after go have their vows again in front of a non-Catholic minister because of something like that, mortal sin. In the old days, before the new Code of Canon Law, automatic excommunication for getting married outside the church. Remember, it's one of the precepts of the church to follow the laws of the church concerning marriage. Well, here are the laws of the church concerning marriage. All right? It's no longer automatic excommunication, but it used to be. All right? To Catholics, it's just too expensive to get married right now in the church. we'll get civilly married, and then someday we hope to have a Catholic wedding. That civil marriage would normally, it is still mortal sin. It's a scandal. It's still mortal sin, but it used to bring excommunication with it as well. It doesn't anymore. Yeah.
So going back to what you said in relation to couples contracting marriage when one or both are in mortal sin and they don't receive the
graces. Yeah.
What happens when they have children and they still, or one or both, don't make a good confession? What are the ramifications on the children until they reach legal age?
Right. Well, remember that a child of two Catholic parents, even when they're in the state of grace, the child can be born of two Catholic parents in the state of grace, the child will still be born in original sin. Grace is not going to be transmitted through Catholic parents in that way. Original sin is going to be on the soul of each one that's born. That's why they have to bring them to baptism. Parents have to do that part for them. All right? But still, the marriage would be valid. The children would have the graces they need. They didn't have any fault. They still don't have fault. They would have the graces they need, all right, strictly speaking. But there are certain graces that are meant to flow through the father and through the mother to the children. The parents are meant to be channels of grace to their children. So each child will have sufficient grace, and God is free, but each child will have sufficient grace to save their soul. But it's very likely that there are special graces that that God intended for those children, but intended to give through their parents, which will not be given unless the parents get back on track. Yeah. And normally, let me put it this way. When mom has big moral problems, usually the children, especially the girls, inherit some of those. And when dad has big moral problems, even if they're secret and no one knows, usually his sons, at least, will be tainted by that too. They won't know why. It'll be their own free will. It'll be their own free choice. But usually, there is a correlation. So fathers, be careful. Mothers, be careful. You need to be close to God, or your children will struggle more than they should. Yes.
Father, if non-Christians got married, it would be valid because the intent, even though it was outside of the church, and then they got a divorce, and then one of them converted to Catholicism and wanted to get married again, would they have to go through the annulment process?
Yes. So, I mean, we could never do a marriage in the Catholic Church if they attempted marriage anywhere else, unless we looked at the validity of that marriage. We have to be able to say that truly that marriage was null and void from the start.
Even if it was a civil marriage.
Yeah. Unless somehow they qualify for Petrine privilege or Pauline privilege, which again have all these special circumstances. That's why the church says, look, it doesn't shake the solidity of marriage because these are so rare and so strict are the conditions that these exceptions don't shake the rule. The rule is still solid as can be. Yeah. They do complicate life for the priests, though, when they come up. All right. We all asleep? I'm very confused. I hope not. Oh, there's a lot to it. There's a reason we study canon law and moral theology, and why 6 years is really not enough. Yes, another question.
Will it be mortal sin if a man or woman asks for a prenup?
Prenuptial agreements. You'd have to ask that, wouldn't you? Prenuptial agreements is like, for example, well, I have children from my previous marriage. My first spouse has died, but I have children from that marriage. I have property. And you have children from your previous marriage, and your spouse has died, and you have property. And you want to make sure that your property goes to your children, and I want to make sure that my property goes to my children. And we're too old to have any children of our own together, probably. But so we want to have all the property to ourselves while the two of us are alive. But when we die, will you agree to let my property go to them and your property go to them? All right, this is the kind of thing. Well, you put any sort of, you put a condition to your consent for marriage, it's not allowed. If it's a condition to your consent that would be against the properties of marriage, it would be invalid, all right? And then what if it's not against the properties? What if it's not against, for example, having children? It's just, well, it's my properties. It's my physical property, all right? It's my stuff. It's just that. Can I make a prenuptial agreement about that? All right? you better talk to the priest, because if you make the wrong move, your marriage will be invalid. If you make the wrong move, you're not allowed to put conditions to your consent. You can say, we've made a certain agreement, that's just a friendly agreement, but to say, I will only say I do. My I do is conditioned by your fidelity to this promise. Then you don't know. You can't put a condition that's not going to be able to be fulfilled until some future date, until you're dead. Right? So, yes. So what we can do, and the church does that. If you're marrying a non-Catholic, we make the non-Catholic party sign a paper saying, I promise, I will raise the children, I will allow my spouse to practice their Catholic faith, and I will raise my children Catholic. I'll make sure they're raised Catholic. If my wife can't do it because she dies, I will do it even though I'm not Catholic. All right, that's what they would have to normally sign. It's not a condition. So that's a condition for us to grant the dispensation to go ahead with the marriage. But it's not, it can't condition the marriage. If later he reneges on his promise, it's mortal sin for him, but the marriage is valid. It can't be a condition for consent. Yeah. I knew these questions were going to come. Yes?
Another question, Father. So if the male is impotent and the woman is infertile, for example, they're allowed to get married if they wanted to?
No, if one of them is impotent, no marriage possible.
What if their intention was adoption?
If it's permanent. No, it's an exchange of rights. They have to be able to perform the marriage act. They can choose to abstain from it, but they have to be capable of performing the marriage act. If they're not capable of that, then it's an invalid marriage. It cannot happen.
Does that mean that person must remain obviously chaste, or they're not allowed to get married?
Yep, some people are not allowed to get married because they can't give what they don't have. They can't promise something they can't do. Now, they don't have to have, God may not send children. They have to be open to children, but God may not send them. But and there they could adopt. But no, you couldn't say, I know I'm impotent, meaning that the act cannot even be performed, all right, ever. If it's permanent impotency, then marriage is not for you. Priesthood is not for everybody. Religious life is not for everybody. Marriage is not for everybody. It's for many, but it's not for everybody.
But if they were just infertile, then they could.
If they're infertile, then they could still marry. Yep. They could. That's why they could be 75 years old and still have a valid marriage. Right? In theory. Yeah. Yes.
Well, what about if medically they could get it wrong and they said you can't have kids, but then when you do get married, for instance,
yeah.
likely to.
Yeah. So again, the inability to have kids that's sterility. That would not invalidate. But if it was inability to perform the marriage act, period. All right. Let's say there was some sort of a malformation by nature, or there was some sort of an explosion, or whatever it might be, and that one person was so compromised they could not physically perform the act, they can't marry. And that's going to be known before. If it's permanent, if it's something where the doctors say, you got a problem right now, but look, there's this procedure and you'll be fine. Well, then get the procedure and it'll be fine. Yeah.
What happens if you are on medication that has a contraceptive effect, but you're not taking that medication
for contraception? So that's going to come up probably more clearly when we have the conference on contraception and NFP. All right, but the long and the short of it is, the contraceptive pills, as they are today, all right, there's no contraceptive pill on the market that is only contraceptive in nature. They're all open to the possibility of a conception and a termination of that child. So if that pill has to be taken, and it's abortifacient, right, then it doesn't matter how good your intention. If you're taking it because you have to, then you have to abstain completely from the marriage rights until you're off that pill. Because you have a grave obligation to avoid abortion, which would be a real possibility. Yeah. Again, very difficult. Pray for your priests and pray for the couples that are married. All right. Now, here we're trying to talk about the benefits and the goods of marriage. And I feel like we've talked about a lot of the negative as well. All right. Because they all go around it. All right. But I think at very least you see marriage as a serious commitment. Don't jump into it if you're not going to take on marriage as God intends it. I think that's the lesson. These young couples that say, well, I'm 18, I can do what I want. can and should are not the same thing. Right? I'm not saying it would be invalid. I'm just saying all of this comes into play. So don't be afraid of marriage, but treat it seriously. Right? Marriage is a beautiful thing. If you're called to it, by all means, but approach it with seriousness. And this kind of sets us up for those conferences later on Catholic courtship, how to go about being serious in the preparation. All right, so thank you for your time, attention. I'll give you a blessing and we'll close. Benedictio Dei Omnipotentis, Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti descendat super vos, et maneat semper. Amen. You know it's been a long conference when the district superior comes to get me.